couple of things I'm very thankful for today. I'm thankful to be here. In the last 3 weeks, we traveled 4,000 miles by car, and it's good to be out of the car. We went to Chinle, Arizona, where our granddaughter, one of our granddaughters, is spending a year as a student missionary, one of the only student missionaries in North America that was sent out this year. And she's been working with the Navajos down there, the children, and we got to spend a few days with her, and that was very interesting. And then last Sabbath we were in Colorado. We attended the Campion Academy Church. It was wonderful to be in a church full of people and lots of young families, and it was just an amazing experience to be there. But I'm glad to see young people at the cameras today. I'm glad to see you using them. Thank you for doing that. And the rest of you, thank you for being here. One other thing, this is Memorial Day weekend. Are there any veterans here today? Anybody a veteran right there? Anybody else? I just want to say thank you for your service to our country. A lot of times we take that for granted. We put flowers out and things like that, but these men and women that served in the armed forces basically put their lives on the line, and I appreciate that very much. The corner of Broadway and 42nd Street in New York City is one of the busiest streets in the world. But one day, a cat threaded her way along the sidewalk and came up to the curb. She was holding a baby kitten in her mouth by the back of the neck, as cats do. She wanted to cross the street, but she was confused and frightened by the roar of trucks and buses and taxis. Several times she stepped cautiously off the curb and then came back. It was just too dangerous. And then something happened. A traffic officer saw her, and immediately he put up his hands and stopped the traffic both ways, because of course he couldn't know which way she wanted to go. Now, when a traffic officer lifts his hand, it isn't a request. There's power behind it. Instantly, all traffic stood still. The cat saw her chance, darted across with her little one to safety, and then the rush and the roar resumed. The cat never knew that she was the object of special care. She never knew that a hand had been lifted especially for her, and that back of that hand was all the authority of the city of New York. We too never know how often a hand is lifted for us. With all the authority of heaven back of it, we are reluctant to think that God would be interested in us, even aware of the needs of a single individual, especially of one on a tiny, seemingly insignificant planet as ours. We hesitate to speak of angel hands being lifted in our behalf, even if we have been told that we are worth more than sparrows. Yet down through the centuries, angels have walked with us, comforting, guiding, encouraging, and delivering from danger. Most of the time they have stayed in the shadows, only occasionally darting across the field of vision, dazzling us with their brightness, bringing us some message from the throne. Ellen White makes this statement: "Not until the providences of God are seen in the light of eternity shall we understand what we owe to the care and interposition of his angels." Today, I want to share with you some stories, some that I've heard personally, some that I've collected over the years. Back where my wife is sitting, I've got a file folder like this of stories. And you know, almost every angel story in the Bible has been repeated in our lifetime. And so, let's go north to Alaska. It was a sleepy, snowy day in a winter that had already been far too long. It was 1964, and it was Friday. The snow had been falling for 2 days, and finally it let up, and Lowell Thomas Jr. Anybody remember that name? Lowell Thomas Jr. left for the airport. As an Alaska state senator, he had business in Fairbanks. His wife, Tay, and the children, Ann, 8, and David, 6, waved goodbye and closed the door quickly because it was still below freezing outside. At about 5 o'clock, because Ann had a headache, they went upstairs to rest and watch TV, and they took off their shoes so they could sit on the beds. About a half hour later, Tay heard a rumbling sound. She had often heard guns firing at a nearby army base, but this was not the rumbling of guns. She shouted, "Earthquake!" and jumped off the bed. Grabbing Ann and calling to David across the hall, they had reached the front door when the house began to shake. And as they ran out into the snow, David was crying, "Mommy, I'm in bare feet." The earth was jolting back and forth with unbelievable force. They were flung violently to the ground. The hallway they had just run through split in two. They heard the sounds of crashing glass and splintering wood. A tree crashed to the ground. Their garage collapsed. Tay Thomas describes what happened. She says the earth began breaking up and buckling all about them. Suddenly, between her and Ann, a great crack opened in the snow. She stared in disbelief as the trench widened, apparently bottomless, separating her from her child. She grabbed the hand of Ann, reached out to her, and was able to pull her across the chasm. They were left, she says, on a wildly bucking slab of earth. Suddenly, it tilted sharply, and they had to hang on to keep from slipping into a yawning crevasse. The earth seemed to be rising just ahead of them. They had the weird feeling that they were riding backward on a monstrous Ferris wheel, going down, down toward the water. Their house had stood on a high bluff overlooking Cook Inlet, but now the entire face of the bluff had fallen to sea level. Any of you that have been to Anchorage, Alaska, this is still very evident today. We were there just a couple of years ago, and they took us out to where this whole side of this hill had slid down. But now the entire face of the bluff had fallen to sea level. A few feet away at the water's edge lay the roof of their house. I'm using her words to describe it. She says all she could think of was that the water would rise as earth tumbled into it, and they would be trapped. The cliffs above them were sheer, with great sections of sand and clay still falling. They had to find a way up that cliff. But the children were too frightened to walk. They kept crying, "We'll die, we'll die." In that desperate situation, she looked up at the sky and silently cried out, "Jesus, where are you? I thought you'd be with us at the end." And suddenly she felt a tremendous peace. She knew that he was with her, not up in the sky somewhere, but right beside her. At that moment, a man appeared above them. They called for help, and he shouted that he would look for a rope. And then 6 or 8 men appeared at the top of the cliff. One of them, a stranger, climbed down. The children threw their arms around him. He took off his black wool jacket, put it around Ann, boosted David into his arms, and led them all back up along the rope. At the top of the cliff, Tay Thomas turned to thank their rescuer. He had disappeared. They were never able to learn his identity. Had God sent an angel in answer to a trusting prayer? Was 8-year-old Anne wearing a jacket that belonged to an angel? We cannot know for sure, but there's a familiar pattern here. And one thing we can be certain, it's the sort of kindness angels like to do. Again, from the pen of Ellen White, not until the providences of God are seen in the light of eternity shall we understand what we owe to the care and interposition of the angels. Then she goes on and says this: we need to understand better than we do the mission of angels. It would be well to remember that every true child of God has the cooperation of heavenly beings. Every one. Invisible armies of light and power attend the meek and lowly ones who believe and claim the promises of God. Now, I just wish at this point that our eyes could be opened. I wish that we could see in this room the angels that are present. I think we would be amazed how many seats are full. I think you would be surprised to see who's sitting next to you. I think we would be surprised as we look at the person next to us. We might even say, I've seen you before. Because I really believe that all of us at some point in our lives has seen our angel. And to think that the God of the universe not only sent his Son to this earth to die for our sins, but he has sent the armies of heaven to encamp round about them that fear him and delivers them. When we're feeling alone, when we're feeling like, does anyone care what's happening to me? If we could only see an extra angel, or maybe a dozen, being sent to our side to support us and guide us and comfort us. We had an interesting experience on our trip. We were going over an 11,300 foot pass in Colorado. And on our van, when it gets warm, when the brakes get warm, there's a warning light that comes on the dash. I've got an appointment to get it checked. But it says ESP-BAS. And we looked it up in the manual and it says it's something to do with a computer braking system. Well, that light came on several times. One thing they said is if you stop the car, or the van, and turn it off and turn it back on, the light will go off, and it did. But we were just starting down this 11,300 foot pass, and it was 10 miles downgrade. We got to the point where we hated to see these warning signs of a steep grade and saying 8% grade or 7%. We started down and, well, got to tell you something funny first. Just before this, there had been a boom in the car. And we thought for sure we'd either blown a tire or something had gone wrong. And I thought for a second and I said, we just popped a bag of potato chips. And that's what it was. At that elevation, they just get bigger and bigger, and it had popped. And so we were on edge. And we started down this pass. And suddenly that light came on, and then there was this noise, and the brakes just started going like this. And I thought, I've got 10 miles of downhill to go. And I found the first place where we could pull over. I turned off the ignition, and I think we silently prayed, Lord, get us down, please. Turned the ignition back on. The brakes worked great all the rest of the way down. You know, I don't know if there was an angel that actually smoothed everything out. But the one thing I do know is that there were angels with us. Another experience, and I know an angel helped me drive this. Any of you ever hear of the Moki Dugway? Nobody's heard of that. Oh, well, let me describe it. In southern Utah, there is a national monument called Natural Bridges National Monument. And it's an amazing place. There are 3 of these bridges. It's not arches. It's Natural Bridges National Monument. We went there, and we had a great time there. And then from there, straight south to Arizona, where we were headed next, there was this beautiful road that went right through the junipers, and we just drove that. And somebody had mentioned the Moki Dugway at the end, and I had no idea what the Moki Dugway was. Until we got there, right to the end, and there's a sign that says, warning, 8% downgrade, no guardrails, gravel road. And we came out of the trees, came to the edge, and we looked down at a valley that's about 2,000 feet below us. It seemed like it was 10,000, but I think it was about 2,000 feet below us. And there, the road that we were on, this paved, nice highway, suddenly turns gravel and goes over the edge and starts winding right down the face of this cliff. Gravel all the way, no guardrails, cars. There's a fair amount of traffic on there. I told my wife, I said, because there was one place I could see where the road went around a bend, and where the road went around, it was actually out on a lip of the cliff, and it went in underneath that part of the road. And I told my wife, take a picture. She said, no, drive. And I did. And when I got to the bottom of that cliff, about 10 miles an hour, but I said, I've got to get out and walk a little bit. I was so white-knuckled and so tense, but you know, the one thing I had to think about is that we weren't alone. And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we forget the incredible gift that God has given to us, not only in salvation, but in the accompaniment of His angels. One of our missionaries, pioneer missionaries in China, a number of years ago, was going on a trip visiting various churches and visiting people in distant areas. And he was riding horseback. And one evening, he realized that he wasn't going to reach his destination before dark. He had sent his porters on ahead. They had all of their supplies, their food, because they were on this trip for several weeks, if not a couple of months. And so he'd sent them all ahead, and they were going to a certain village, and he was going to meet them there. But as he had stopped to visit with somebody about Jesus, and he had a lot of questions, and so now he was trying to make up time, but it was getting dark. And he stopped at a little guest house, and he bought a little paper Chinese lantern because the porters had taken his lanterns. So he bought this little paper lantern, and he rode on this horse, and after a little while, suddenly the light went out in the lantern, blew out. And it was dark, and he thought, how am I going to get to my destination with no light? But then he also realized this was a very dangerous area. There were a lot of people here who were thieves and robbers and waylaid people that were on this road. So he said, if I have a light on, they can see me. And so maybe it's better if I don't have a light. And he kept riding his horse, and he figured the horse knows where the trail is and will follow. And he came to the top of a hill and started down, and then at the bottom, he crossed a wooden bridge, a little bridge there. And then off to the right in the trees, he saw a house that was lit up. And he thought, maybe I can stop here and ask how far the village is, and maybe I could get my lantern relighted. And just as he came up to the door opened and a man came out. And the missionary said, "Kind sir, could you please share some light with me?" And he obliged. He said, "Well, where are you going?" to the missionary. And the missionary told him the village. And he said, "I'm going that direction also. Do you mind if I go with you?" Well, he was sure that he didn't want to say, I do mind. I don't want you to go with me, because if he was a bandit, that would make him angry. So he said, "No, please." And so he walked with him. And it was interesting because he seemed to know him. And they walked on for several hours, and they finally came to a place where the road split. And the other man said, I turn off here. And the missionary said, "I thought you were going to my village." He said, "You're almost there. It's just around the next bend there, but I turn off here." And as the man went, just before he went, he said, "Let me have prayer for you." And he prayed for him by name. Now, he hadn't given him his name, but he prayed for him, and then he rode off. He reached the village, found his porters, and several months later, he came back through that same area in daylight. And he thought, I want to see that house where that man came from, because there was just something about that man that he wasn't the common type of person that he would find in that area. And so as he came back this next time, he came down that hill, crossed the little footbridge, and he looked off to the right, and there was no house there. And he thought, maybe it's overgrown, and he got off his horse and walked over there, and nothing, absolutely nothing. And then he said, maybe it burned down. So he looked carefully. There was no opening where a house could have even fit in. And suddenly he realized that there was no house there. And that night, when he was alone and when he felt like he was in danger, God had placed an angel at that place to walk with him through the dangerous part of the journey to his destination. What would it be like to walk with an angel? I think we all have. We just didn't know it. Again, Ellen White makes this statement. In the future life, every redeemed one will understand the ministry of angels in his own life. The angel who was his guardian from his earliest moment, the angel who watched his steps and covered his head in the day of peril, the angel who was with him in the valley of the shadow of death, who marked his resting place, who was the first to greet him in the resurrection morning. What will it be to hold converse with him and to learn the history of divine interposition in the individual life, of heavenly cooperation in every work for humanity? That is an exciting thing to look forward to. I look forward to meeting Jesus and to thanking him for his incredible gift of sacrifice and his death on the cross for me. But I also look forward to the great representatives that Jesus has sent to walk by our side and to be with us. What will it be like to thank our angels, and then the angel can say to us, by the way, let me tell you a couple of stories about yourself that you didn't even realize you were in danger. You didn't even realize that I was there, but I saved your life. What will it be like to have that experience? In New York City, there was a lady. She was a Bible worker, out giving Bible studies to people, and one day she had had an absolutely thrilling experience, a thrilling day. That day, she had just had the joy of a couple of young people that she was studying with, of giving their hearts to Jesus and saying, we want to follow Jesus. And then she had gone to visit a Jewish family, and the Jewish family had told her that they would be with her in church this coming Sabbath. She was so thrilled that she didn't even realize that when she got on the subway, she got on the wrong number. And the one that she had gotten on took her close to where she lived, but about 6 blocks away, and stopped in Harlem. It was night. And she was just excited on the train. When the subway stopped, she realized, well, it's close to my house, my apartment. I can just walk the 6 blocks. She got off, she started walking, and she was walking down the sidewalk when suddenly from between 2 buildings, a hand reached out and grabbed her and pulled her into the darkness. And suddenly she realized she was in desperate trouble. Because the unknown attacker was taking her back farther and farther into the darkness. And she knew what would happen. All she could do at that point is say, God, help. And suddenly there was a policeman that came into the little alley there, and he said in a very authoritative voice, "What's going on here?" And the man immediately dropped her on the ground. "Nothing, officer, nothing." And she got up, and the man was trying to run out of the alleyway, but the officer reached out and grabbed him, and he said, "I don't ever want you to do anything like that again. Will you promise that?" "Yes, officer, yes." And then he turned to the lady and said, "Would you like to press charges?" And she said, "No, I won't." He warned the man again, and then he let go of him, and the man ran out of the alleyway. And the officer turned to her and he said, "What were you doing out here?" And she explained the joy of what she had experienced that way. And he said to her, "In your love for God and your excitement of doing His work, never lose sight of using your mind and making right decisions. And what you did in coming here was not a good decision." He said, "Would you like for me to walk with you the rest of the way to your apartment?" She said, "Yes, it's not very far," but he said, "I know where you live." And he called her by name. And she thought, how does he know my name? I've never seen this man before. And he walked with her and encouraged her and counseled her, and right up to the doorway of her apartment. And the doorman there pressed the button to open the door so she could go in. When she turned to the doorman, she said, "Did you see that man that policeman with me?" He said, "No." He said, "I've been watching you walking this direction for a couple of blocks, and there was no one with you. You were alone." She said, "But I was walking. It was a policeman, and he talked with me. I didn't see anybody, and I was watching you the whole time." The next day, she called the Harlem Police Precinct and the neighboring precinct headquarters, and she asked, "Did you have any walking officers on last night in this neighborhood?" And they said, "No, we don't dare put anybody on foot out in those neighborhoods at night. They're all in cruisers." And she realized that she had been rescued and saved by one of God's angels. We could go on and on. I could tell you stories till all afternoon of experiences like this. One of the things that we've had the joy of doing over the years is inviting people to our house for Sabbath dinner. And after we eat and everybody's content and happy, I generally ask them a couple questions. Have you ever experienced a miracle in your life? Or have you ever felt like you met an angel? And it's amazing the stories that I have heard. It's amazing that common, ordinary people, everywhere I've gone and asked that question, have come and said, yes, let me tell you a story. A fella in a church just right across the river here told me this story happened in New York. He's a truck driver. And he was hauling a load into New York City, and he didn't know exactly how to get to the destination. And he got on this interstate, and suddenly he realized that the highway that he was on had a sign, no trucks allowed. So he said, I got to get off of this. And so the first exit, he pulled his semi off, and he started down the exit ramp, and he saw a sign, and the sign said, low clearance, 10 feet, 11 inches. He knew that his truck was 11 feet, 6 inches, 7 inches too tall to fit under the bridge. He pulled over onto the shoulder of the exit ramp, and he just sat there. He said, I didn't even pray. He said, I was so overwhelmed, I just didn't know what to do. I couldn't back up there because I wasn't supposed to be up there. And, who knows where that would take me. I couldn't go ahead because there was a bridge that was 7 inches lower than I was tall. So he said, I just sat there. And then as I was sitting there, he said, there was a knock on my window. And he said, I'm in New York, and I'm not about to open the window, because who knows who's out there. But there's this man standing on the running board right outside my window. And so I rolled it down just a little bit, and the man said to me, you are having problems, aren't you? And he said, yeah, that bridge is too low for me. He said, just follow me. And he went ahead of him, and the one thing I forgot to ask him is, was there no other traffic? Because apparently there wasn't any other traffic at that time. And the man just walked down the ramp ahead of him and just kept coming like this. And as he got closer and closer to the bridge, I mean, he knew he was going to hit that bridge. And when he felt like the trailer was just about to hit, he waited for the crunch and the grinding noise, and there was nothing. And the man just kept going like this. And he went all the way under that bridge without scratching anything. And he said, wow, wonder how he did that. I mean, even if I let the air out of my tires, I probably wouldn't have gained 7 inches to get under there. And he got out the other side, and he was just a sigh of relief, and then he saw a second sign. Low clearance, 10 feet, 11 inches. There was a second bridge. The man in front just kept going like this. Guided him under the second bridge, and he pulled off pulled over to the shoulder beyond the second bridge, and the man came up to his window, and the fellow's telling the story. He said, I asked the man, I said, I'm trying to get to such and such a place, and I don't know how to get there. I'm not familiar with New York that much. Can you tell me how to get there? And he told him exactly. He said, go turn, and how to get to his destination. And he said, you have been so helpful. I would just like to write you a little thank you note. Just a minute, let me get your address. And he said, I went over here right next to my seat to pick up a pen and a piece of paper. And when I came back, there was no one at the window. And he said, I looked in my mirror, and I looked back, because anybody that would have walked away would be walking that way. And there was no one there, and I looked ahead and there was no one there. And he said, I realized that that wasn't a common, ordinary person. How did he squeeze my truck down to get under those two bridges? I don't know. But I know that God sent an angel to be with me. And so whatever we may be going through, whatever experience in life, we need to remember that we are not alone. There are unseen, powerful representatives from the courts of heaven that are with us. One other statement from Ellen White here. Again and again have angels talked with men as a man speaks with a friend, and led them to places of security. Again and again have the encouraging words of angels renewed the drooping spirits of the faithful, and carrying their minds above the things of earth, caused them to behold by faith the white robes, the crowns, the palm branches of victory, which overcomers will receive when they surround the great white throne. I love that phrase, again and again. Again and again we have walked with angels. Again and again we have experienced their actions in our lives. And I think, folks, as we approach the end of time, and I believe that is not far away, when I realize how a year ago, in 3 weeks or less, everything that we know is normal came to an end. Churches closed in 3 weeks. How fast can the end of time go? How fast can the end of time happen, the things that lead up to the coming of Jesus? I think when we think of the statement, the final movements will be rapid ones. We got a glimpse of that last year. And I don't know how soon it's going to be, but I believe it's very soon. The one thing I think we can remember is that we will not be alone. We are not going through that time on our own strength and our own power. We will be walking with the angels. Let's pray. Father in heaven, just a few simple stories reminding us that you care for us, that you are interested in our daily needs, our burdens, our trials, our difficulties. And if there's anyone here today that feels lonely, that feels like, where are you, God? Why don't you do something? Just somehow reassure them today that you are there for them. Not only at the cross, not only with the promise of heaven, but with the presence of your representatives every moment of every day. So be with us as we leave this place. Walk with us through your angels. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.